The fluorescent lights of the financial aid office flickered above me as I stared at the rejection letter in my hands. Insufficient funds. Those two words glared up at me, mocking all my careful planning. 3 years of perfect grades, working. 2 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and now this. A simple administrative error was going to derail everything I'd worked for. Or, at least that's what I thought it was. An error. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, those 2 words would be the least of my problems. Hi, I'm Emma Wilson, and 6 months ago I discovered that the money I'd spent my entire life saving for my education had vanished. Not because of identity theft or a bank collapse, but because the people I trusted most in this world, my own family, had decided my future wasn't as important as a single day of celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and the spring semester was hitting its midterm stride at Westridge University. I'd been pulling double shifts at both the library and my weekend tech job, trying to stock away extra cash for my final year of college. My phone buzzed as I walked across the campus quad, the caller ID displaying First Community Bank. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail. Who answers unknown calls these days? But something made me pick up. Hello, is this Emma Wilson? The voice was professional, warm. This is Mrs. Patel from First Community Bank. I'm calling about your educational savings account. My educational savings account. The one my grandmother Eleanor had helped me open when I was 10 years old, proudly depositing my first $100 birthday check. The account that, over the past decade, I'd fed with every spare dollar from summer jobs, Christmas money, and my part-time work. The account that was supposed to cover my senior year tuition, due in less than a month. Yes, that's me, I replied, already veering off the path toward a bench where I could sit down. Something in Mrs. Patel's tone told me this wasn't a routine call. I'm calling because there's been some unusual activity on your account that I wanted to verify with you directly. A series of large withdrawals have been made over the past 3 months. My stomach dropped. Withdrawals? There must be a mistake. I haven't withdrawn anything. The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. The withdrawals were authorized by the co-signers on your account, Robert and Linda Wilson. My parents. How much? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Another pause. The account balance is currently $843.27. I felt like I'd been punched. Last time I checked, just before the semester started, the balance had been over $42,000. Money I'd earned, money I'd saved, money that was supposed to secure my future. There must be a mistake, I repeated. But even as the words left my mouth, a cold realization was settling in my chest. I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, but the withdrawals appear to be legitimate. As co-signers, your parents have legal access to the account until you turn 25 or graduate college. However, given the nature of the account and its intended purpose, I felt it was important to contact you directly. I thanked her mechanically, promised to come into the branch to discuss further, and hung up. For several minutes, I just sat there on the bench, students streaming past me on their way to class, completely unaware that my world had just collapsed. That evening, I drove to my parents' house instead of my small apartment near campus. The why? Familiar 2-story home in Riverside's Oak Hills neighborhood looked exactly the same. Dad's SUV in the driveway, Mom's collection of potted plants lining the front steps, the porch light welcoming me home. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like I was walking into a trap. They were in the kitchen when I arrived, Mom chopping vegetables for dinner, Dad reading something on his tablet. So normal. So oblivious to the fact that they had just stolen my future. Emma, what a nice surprise, Mom smiled, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I thought you had a late shift at the library today. I got someone to cover for me, I said, my voice eerily calm. I needed to ask you something important. Maybe it was my tone, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't taken off my jacket or set down my bag, but something made both of them pause. Dad put down his tablet. Mom stopped mid-reach for a hug. "What's going on, honey?" Dad asked, his expression casual but his eyes watchful. "I got a call from the bank today," I said, watching their faces carefully. "About my college fund." The subtle exchange of glances between them told me everything I needed to know even before they started making excuses. "Oh, that," Mom said, her voice artificially light. "We were going to talk to you about that." "When?" I asked. "After I couldn't pay my tuition? After I had to drop out with 1 year left? When exactly were you planning to tell me you emptied my account?" Dad stood up, always the one to take charge when things got uncomfortable. "Now, Emma, I know this seems bad, but it's not what you think." "Really? Because I think you took over $40,000 of my money without asking me. Money I've been saving since I was 10 years old." "It was an investment," Dad said, using his reasonable business voice, the one he deployed when explaining why something expensive was actually a good deal. "A family investment?" "What investment?" I demanded, although a sickening suspicion was already forming. Mom and Dad exchanged another look before Mom spoke. "Sophia's wedding. The venue required a significant deposit, and with the destination weekend and all the events, the costs added up quickly." Sophia, my older sister. The perfect daughter who was marrying into the Brooks family, with their country club memberships and summer homes. The wedding that had consumed every family conversation for the past 6 months. The celebration that was apparently worth sacrificing my education for. "You spent my college fund on Sophia's wedding?" The words felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth, too absurd to be real. "We didn't spend all of it," Mom said quickly, "and it's not like we won't pay you back. Once the wedding is over, we'll start putting money back into the account. The wedding is in June. My tuition is due in April." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "You can take a semester off. Lots of students do it. Or get a student loan like everyone else. You're smart, Emma. You'll figure it out." The casual way he said it, like my education was an afterthought, like years of my hard work could just be brushed aside, ignited something in me. Not the explosive anger I might have expected, but a cold, clear fury that sharpened my thoughts to a razor's edge. "Did Sophia know?" I asked. "That her perfect wedding was being paid for with my college fund?" Another telling glance between them. "We didn't see any reason to worry her," Mom said. "She has enough stress planning everything." Of course. Heaven forbid Sophia experience any discomfort while my entire future was being sacrificed for her. Big day. "I see," I said, and I did. I saw everything with perfect clarity. I saw that in the hierarchy of our family, I had always ranked below Sophia. I saw that my parents had never really viewed my money as mine, just as another resource they could tap when needed, and I saw that if I was going to salvage anything from this disaster, I would have to do it myself. "I need to go," I said, turning toward the door. "Emma, wait," Mom called, her voice tinged with worry for the first time. "Let's talk about this. We can figure something out." I paused at the door, not trusting myself to look back at them. "You've done enough figuring for all of us, don't you think?" I spent that night in my apartment, staring at my ceiling, my mind racing between panic and calculation. By morning, I had moved beyond shock into something more productive: strategy. First, I went to the financial aid office at Westridge. The advisor, Mr. Chen, listened sympathetically to my situation, but confirmed what I already feared. It was too late in the year for most scholarships, and with my parents' income, I wouldn't qualify for need-based aid even if they had just emptied my account. "Unfortunately, the FAFSA looks at last year's tax returns," he explained. On paper, your family can afford to contribute to your education. But they won't, I said flatly. He gave me a look of genuine sympathy. Family. Situations can be complicated. Let me see what options we have. Those options were limited and grim. Take on significant private loans with high interest rates, reduce my course load and extend my time in school, or take a leave of absence until I could afford to return. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Mom says you're upset about something? Call me. I ignored it. Sophia and I had always been different. She was the social butterfly. I was the serious student. She followed the path of least resistance. I challenged everything. She was content to let our parents manage her life. I had been fighting for independence since I was 15. But despite our differences, we'd never been enemies. Until now. Instead of calling my sister, I called the one person I knew would understand, my cousin Olivia. 2 years older than me and fiercely independent, Olivia had put herself through college after a falling out with her parents. If anyone would have practical advice, it would be her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meet me at the daily grind in 20, she said after I explained the situation. No questions asked, no platitudes offered. This was why I loved Olivia. The coffee shop was busy with afternoon customers, but we found a corner table away from the crowd. Olivia listened intently as I filled in the details, her expression growing darker with each new revelation. This is beyond messed up, she said when I finished. But I'm not surprised. You're not? She shook her head. Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda have always played favorites, and they've always treated money like it belongs to the family, meaning them. What did you do? I asked, when you had to figure out college on your own? Olivia took a sip of her coffee, considering. I got creative, and I got tough, and I found people who could help me that weren't my parents. Like who? Have you talked to Grandma Eleanor about this? I hesitated. My grandmother was a force of nature, fiercely protective of all her grandchildren. She had been the one to suggest the educational savings account in the first place, making the first deposit herself and encouraging me to save from an early age. I don't want to put her in the middle, I said. She's already in the middle. She helped you set up that account. And trust me, she would want to know. I nodded, knowing Olivia was right. What else? Document everything, she said firmly. Get printouts of all the withdrawals, copies of any agreements about the account, everything. Knowledge is power, and evidence is even better. For what? I can't sue my own parents. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Can't you? The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing someone else suggest it made it suddenly real. Could I really take legal action against my own family? The idea was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I admitted. You don't have to decide right now, but having the documentation doesn't commit you to anything. It just keeps your options open. I nodded, feeling a plan beginning to form. I should go to the bank tomorrow, talk to Mrs. Patel in person. Good first step, Olivia agreed. And Emma, remember that you don't have to face this alone. The next morning, I arrived at First Community Bank just as they opened. Mrs. Patel, the manager who had called me, was a petite woman with a no-nonsense attitude and kind eyes. She ushered me into her office immediately. I pulled the complete account history for you, she said, handing me a thick printout. As you can see, the withdrawals began 3 months ago, initially small amounts but increasing in size and frequency. I flipped through the pages, noting the pattern. My parents had been methodical, starting with withdrawals of a few $100, small enough that I might not notice if I checked my balance casually, before progressing to thousands at a time. The most recent withdrawal, just a week ago, had been for $12,000. Were these in person or online? I asked. Both. The larger withdrawals were made in person, requiring signature verification. I nodded, absorbing this information. Mrs. Patel, when this account was established, wasn't there some stipulation about its purpose? I remember my grandmother being very specific that it was for my education. Mrs. Patel's expression shifted slightly. Yes, the account was designated as an educational savings account. While the cosigners legally have access until the conditions of the account are fulfilled, the designated purpose is clearly educational. Expenses. So my parents withdrawing the money for my sister's wedding, that's not consistent with the account's purpose. No, she said carefully. It's not, and that's why I contacted you directly. I took a deep breath. What are my options now? Legally, your options are limited as long as your parents remain cosigners. However, she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. There may be other considerations. The bank takes the misuse of designated educational funds very seriously. What does that mean exactly? It means that I'd like to schedule another meeting with our legal department present. The specific terms of your account agreement might offer some recourse. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. I'd appreciate that very much. As I left the bank, clutching the folder of account statements, my phone rang. It was Sophia. After declining her calls yesterday, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. With a deep breath, I answered, "Emma, finally! What's going on? Mom and Dad are acting weird, and they said something about your school money?" I closed my eyes, leaning against my car in the bank parking lot. "Did they tell you where the money for your wedding is coming from?" "What?" Dad said everything was covered, that I shouldn't worry about the budget. He and Mom wanted me to have my dream wedding. Her voice faltered. "Emma, what's happening?" "They emptied my college fund, Sophia. Over $40,000 that I've been saving since I was 10. They took it all for your wedding." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought we might have been disconnected. Then, in a small voice I barely recognized as my confident sister's, "They what?" In that moment, I realized something important. Sophia might have been the favorite, might have been oblivious to the family dynamics that always worked in her favor. But she wasn't complicit in this theft. She was just another player in our parents' game, a pawn like me, even if she usually got the better position on the board. "I found out yesterday," I explained, my voice steadier than I expected. "The bank called because they noticed unusual withdrawals. Mom and Dad have been emptying my account for months to pay for your destination wedding." "Oh my God, Emma, I had no idea. I would never—" Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry. This is horrible." Despite everything, I believed her. Sophia could be self-centered and privileged, but she wasn't cruel. "I know you didn't know." "I'll call off the wedding," she said suddenly, "or at least scale it way back. Tyler will understand. We can do something small, intimate." "Sophia, no, this is insane. They can't just steal your future for my wedding day. That's not love. That's theft." Her righteous anger on my behalf was unexpected, and I had to admit, deeply validating. For years, I'd felt invisible in Sophia's shadow, the practical daughter overshadowed by the golden child. Hearing her immediately take my side, without hesitation or excuses, healed something in me I hadn't realized was wounded. "Don't do anything yet," I said. "I'm working on a plan, but thank you for believing me." "Of course I believe you. You're my sister." She paused. "What can I do to help?" It was such a simple question, but one that no one in my family had ever really asked me before. What could they do to help me? The assumption had always been that I was the competent one, the independent one who didn't need help. Having Sophia, of all people, offer her support felt like a fundamental shift in our relationship. "I'm meeting with the bank's legal department next week," I told her. "And I'm going to talk to Grandma Eleanor. Can you just—" Not tell Mom and Dad that we spoke? Let me handle this my way for now. Whatever you need, she promised. But Emma, don't shut me out, okay? We're in this together now. As I hung up, the weight on my shoulders felt marginally lighter. I still didn't have my money back, still didn't know how I'd pay for my final year of college, still faced a betrayal so profound it had shaken my foundation. But for the first time since Mrs. Patel's call, I didn't feel completely alone. I hadn't just lost my college fund. I'd gained clarity about my family, discovered unexpected allies, and found a strength in myself I didn't know I possessed. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. My parents thought they could sacrifice my future for a single day of celebration, but they were about to learn that I was no longer the compliant daughter they could manipulate and dismiss. The meeting with the bank's legal department was scheduled for Monday morning. My conversation with Grandma Eleanor would happen even sooner, and somewhere in between, I would figure out exactly how to reclaim not just my money, but my power within my family. Because one thing was certain. After this, nothing would ever be the same again. I spent that night in my apartment, staring at my ceiling, my mind racing between panic and calculation. By morning, I had moved beyond shock into something more productive: strategy. First, I went to the financial aid office at Westridge. The advisor, Mr. Chen, listened sympathetically to my situation but confirmed what I already feared. It was too late in the year for most scholarships, and with my parents' income, I wouldn't qualify for need-based aid even if they had just emptied my account. Unfortunately, the FAFSA looks at last year's tax returns, he explained. On paper, your family can afford to contribute to your education. But they won't, I said flatly. He gave me a look of genuine sympathy. Family situations can be complicated. Let me see what options we have. Those options were limited and grim. Take on significant private loans with high interest rates, reduce my course load and extend my time in school, or take a leave of absence until I could afford to return. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Mom says you're upset about something. Call me. I ignored it. Sophia and I had always been different. She was the social butterfly. I was the serious student. She followed the path of least resistance. I challenged everything. She was content to let our parents manage her life. I had been fighting for independence since I was 15. But despite our differences, we'd never been enemies. Until now. Instead of calling my sister, I called the one person I knew would understand. My cousin Olivia. 2 years older than me and fiercely independent, Olivia had put herself through college after a falling out with her parents. If anyone would have practical advice, it would be her. Meet me at the daily grind in 20, she said, after I explained the situation. No questions asked, no platitudes offered. This was why I loved Olivia. The coffee shop was busy with afternoon customers, but we found a corner table away from the crowd. Olivia listened intently as I filled in the details, her expression growing darker with each new revelation. This is beyond messed up, she said when I finished. But I'm not surprised. You're not? She shook her head. Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda have always played favorites, and they've always treated money like it belongs to the family, meaning them. What did you do? I asked. When you had to figure out college on your own? Olivia took a sip of her coffee, considering. I got creative, and I got tough, and I found people who could help me that weren't my parents. Like who? Have you talked to Grandma Eleanor about this? I hesitated. My grandmother was a force of nature, fiercely protective of all her grandchildren. She had been the one to suggest the educational savings account in the first place, making the first deposit herself and encouraging me to save from an early age. I don't want to put her in the middle, I said. She's already in the middle. She helped you set up that account. And trust me, she would want to know. I nodded, knowing Olivia was right. What else? Document everything, she said firmly. Get printouts of all the withdrawals, copies of any agreements about the account, everything. Knowledge is power, and evidence is even better. For what? I can't sue my own parents. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Can't you? The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing someone else suggest it made it suddenly real. Could I really take legal action against my own family? The idea was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I admitted. You don't have to decide right now, but having the documentation doesn't commit you to anything. It just keeps your options open. I nodded, feeling a plan beginning to form. I should go to the bank tomorrow, talk to Mrs. Patel in person. Good first step, Olivia agreed. And Emma, remember that you don't have to face this alone. The next morning, I arrived at First Community Bank just as they opened. Mrs. Patel, the manager who had called me, was a petite woman with a no-nonsense attitude and kind eyes. She ushered me into her office immediately. I pulled the complete account history for you, she said, handing me a thick printout. As you can see, the withdrawals began 3 months ago, initially small amounts but increasing in size and frequency. I flipped through the pages, noting the pattern. My parents had been methodical, starting with withdrawals of a few $100s, small enough that I might not notice if I checked my balance casually, before progressing to thousands at a time. The most recent withdrawal, just a week ago, had been for $12,000. Were these in person or online? I asked. Both. The larger withdrawals were made in person, requiring signature verification. I nodded, absorbing this information. Mrs. Patel, when this account was established, wasn't there some stipulation about its purpose? I remember my grandmother being very specific that it was for my education. Mrs. Patel's expression shifted slightly. Yes, the account was designated as an educational savings account. While the co-signers legally have access until the conditions of the account are fulfilled, the designated purpose is clearly educational. Expenses. So my parents withdrawing the money for my sister's wedding, that's not consistent with the account's purpose? No, she said carefully, it's not. And that's why I contacted you directly. I took a deep breath. What are my options now? Legally, your options are limited as long as your parents remain co-signers. However, she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. There may be other considerations. The bank takes the misuse of designated educational funds very seriously. What does that mean exactly? It means that I'd like to schedule another meeting with our legal department present. The specific terms of your account agreement might offer some recourse. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. I'd appreciate that very much. As I left the bank, clutching the folder of account statements, my phone rang. It was Sophia. After declining her calls yesterday, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. With a deep breath, I answered. Emma, finally. What's going on? Mom and Dad are acting weird and they said something about your school money? I closed my eyes, leaning against my car in the bank parking lot. Did they tell you where the money for your wedding is coming from? What? Dad said everything was covered, that I shouldn't worry about the budget. He and Mom wanted me to have my dream wedding. Her voice faltered. Emma, what's happening? They emptied my college fund, Sophia. Over $40,000 that I've been saving since I was 10. They took it all for your wedding. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Then, in a small voice I barely recognized as my confident sister's, they what? In that moment, I realized something important. Sophia might have been the favorite, might have been oblivious to the family dynamics that always worked in her favor, but she wasn't complicit in this theft. She was just another player in our parents' game, a pawn like me, even if she usually got the better position on the board. I found out yesterday. I explained, my voice steadier than I expected. The bank called because they noticed unusual withdrawals. Mom and Dad have been emptying my account for months to pay for your destination wedding. Oh my God, Emma, I had no idea. I would never. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry. This is horrible. Despite everything, I believed her. Sophia could be self-centered and privileged, but she wasn't cruel. I know you didn't know. I'll call off the wedding, she said suddenly. Or at least scale it way back. Tyler will understand. We can do something small, intimate. Sophia. No, this is insane. They can't just steal your future for my wedding day. That's not love, that's theft. Her righteous anger on my behalf was unexpected and, I had to admit, deeply validating. For years, I'd felt invisible in Sophia's shadow, the practical daughter overshadowed by the golden child. Hearing her immediately take my side, without hesitation or excuses, healed something in me I hadn't realized was wounded. Don't do anything. Yet, I said. I'm working on a plan, but thank you for believing me. Of course I believe you. You're my sister. She paused. What can I do to help? It was such a simple question, but one that no one in my family had ever really asked me before. What could they do to help me? The assumption had always been that I was the competent one, the independent one who didn't need help. Having Sophia, of all people, offer her support felt like a fundamental shift in our relationship. I'm meeting with the bank's legal department next week, I told her. And I'm going to talk to Grandma Eleanor. Can you just not tell Mom and Dad that we spoke? Let me handle this my way for now? Whatever you need, she promised. But Emma, don't shut me out, okay? We're in this together now. As I hung up, the weight on my shoulders felt marginally lighter. I still didn't have my money back, still didn't know how I'd pay for my final year of college, still faced a betrayal so profound it had shaken my foundation. But for the first time since Mrs. Patel's call, I didn't feel completely alone. I hadn't just lost my college fund. I'd gained clarity about my family, discovered unexpected allies, and found a strength in myself I didn't know I possessed. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My parents thought they could sacrifice my future for a single day of celebration, but they were about to learn that I was no longer the compliant daughter they could manipulate and dismiss. The meeting with the bank's legal department was scheduled for Monday morning. My conversation with Grandma Eleanor would happen even sooner. And somewhere in between, I would figure out exactly how to reclaim not just my money, but my power within my family. Because one thing was certain, after this, nothing would ever be the same again. Visiting Grandma Eleanor wasn't something I planned to do that weekend, but after my conversation with Sophia, I realized I couldn't wait until after the bank meeting. I needed to understand exactly what had happened when my account was first established, what protections had been put in place, what my grandmother had intended, and more than that, I needed someone in my corner who wasn't afraid to stand up to my parents. Grandma Eleanor lived in the historic district of Riverside, in a Victorian house that had been in our family for 3 generations. When I pulled into her driveway Saturday morning, I felt a sense of security I hadn't experienced in days. This house, with its wraparound porch and stained glass windows, had always been a sanctuary for me. I found her in the garden, pruning her prized roses, with the precision of a surgeon. At 74, Eleanor Wilson moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger. Her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her gardening clothes pristine despite the dirt surrounding her. "Emma," she called out, removing her gloves as I approached. "What a lovely surprise. I was just thinking about calling you." "You were?" I asked, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Of course. With all this wedding nonsense consuming everyone's attention, I wanted to make sure my sensible granddaughter hadn't been entirely forgotten. She studied my face. "But that's not why you're here, is it? Something's wrong." I never could hide anything from Grandma Eleanor. She had an uncanny ability to read people, especially family. It was one of the reasons my father, her son, kept a careful distance from her. She saw through his charm to the selfishness beneath. "Let's have tea," she said, not waiting for my answer. "Whatever it is, it'll be easier to discuss with a cup of Earl Grey." In her kitchen, with its gleaming copper pots and herb-lined windowsills, I watched her prepare tea with the same methodical care she applied to everything. Only when we were seated at her oak table, china cups steaming between us, did she fix me with her clear blue eyes. "Now then, tell me what Robert and Linda have done. Not what's wrong or what's bothering you, but a direct accusation that placed the blame squarely where it belonged, with my parents." I almost smiled despite everything. "They emptied my college fund," I said simply, "for Sophia's wedding." Grandma Eleanor's cup froze halfway to her lips. For a moment, she was perfectly still. Then she carefully set the cup down, her movements deliberate. "How much?" Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Almost all of it. Over $40,000. There's less than 1,000 left. And your tuition? Due in 3 weeks. I don't have it." A flush crept up her neck, spreading to her cheeks. Not the blush of embarrassment, but the crimson of anger. I'd only seen my grandmother truly angry a handful of times in my life, and it was always a formidable sight. "They had no right," she said, each word precise and sharp. "That account was for your education. That was the explicit purpose when we established it." Mrs. Patel at the bank said the same thing, but apparently as co-signers, they had legal access. Legal access doesn't make it right. Grandma Eleanor stood abruptly, walking to a roll-top desk in the corner of the kitchen. She pulled out a drawer, rifling through files with purpose. "I have copies of everything. When we set up that account, I made sure there were specific provisions about its purpose. Mrs. Patel mentioned that she's arranging a meeting with the bank's legal department on Monday." "Good." She pulled out a folder, then sat back down at the table. "I'll be there." "Grandma, you don't have to—" "Emma Jean Wilson." She cut me off with the full name treatment she reserved for serious moments. "This is not just about the money. This is about respect, about honoring commitments, about parents protecting their children's futures, not sacrificing them for appearances." She slid the folder toward me. "Your grandfather and I set aside money for each of our grandchildren's education. Your cousins, Sophia, you. Each of you received the same amount. When you turned 10, do you know what Sophia did with hers?" I shook my head. I'd never thought to ask. "She spent it before she finished high school. Shopping sprees, spring break trips, a car she crashed 3 months after getting it. Your parents enabled every penny of it, telling her not to worry, that there would always be more money." Grandma Eleanor's lips thinned. "You, on the other hand, saved everything. You added to it. You worked jobs since you were 15 to build that fund, and now they've taken it for Sophia. Again." The "again" caught me by surprise. You mean again?" Grandma Eleanor sighed, suddenly looking her age. "This isn't the first time they've favored her at your expense, Emma? Just the most egregious." She reached across the table and took my hand. "When your grandfather died, he left specific bequests for each of his grandchildren. Yours was to be held in trust until you finished your education. I suspect Robert and Linda have been eyeing that money for years, waiting for the right moment to access it." My mind was reeling. "There's more money? For me?" "Not yet. Not until you graduate. That was the condition your grandfather set. The trust remains sealed until you complete your degree." A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. "He was very specific about that part. It's why I've been so insistent that you stay in school, even when it's been difficult. So if I drop out because I can't pay tuition, then you never access the trust, and I wouldn't put it past your father to be counting on exactly that outcome." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Sophia's wedding. This was calculated, a way to kill two birds with one stone, pay for the lavish celebration, and, in the process, ensure that I never gained access to whatever my grandfather had left me. "How much is in the trust?" I asked, my throat dry. "Enough to change your life," Grandma Eleanor said simply. "Enough that Robert has been bothering me about it for years, trying to find loopholes, suggesting you don't need the pressure of too much money too young. Enough that he'd sabotage your education to keep you from it." I sat back, stunned. All these years, I'd thought the dynamic in our family was simple. Sophia was the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the practical, responsible one who didn't need as much attention or support. I never realized there was a financial calculation underlying it all. "What do I do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Grandma Eleanor's expression hardened with resolve. "First, we secure your education. That's non-negotiable. I have savings." "No," I interrupted. "I can't take your money." "It's not taking. It's family supporting family. The way it should be." Her tone brooked no argument. "Second, we hold them accountable. Not just for the money, but for the breach of trust. The bank meeting is a good start." "And third?" I asked, sensing there was more to her plan. A gleam appeared in her eye, one that reminded me that beneath my grandmother's proper exterior was a woman who had navigated a male-dominated business world in the 1970s and emerged victorious. "Third, we make sure they never underestimate you." "Genwon," for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a genuine smile tug at my lips. "I like the sound of that. Your grandfather always said the best revenge is living well," she continued, her voice warming with memory. "But he also kept meticulous records and knew when to fight. You're more like him than anyone else in this family." She tapped the folder between us. "Read these tonight. Come back tomorrow, and we'll finalize our strategy before the bank meeting." "What about Mom and Dad? They've been calling." "Let them," she said firmly. "Let them worry. Let them wonder what you're doing. Robert has always been at his worst, when he's scrambling and Linda follows wherever he leads. Give them time to make mistakes." As I rose to leave, folder tucked securely under my arm, Grandma Eleanor clasped my shoulders. "Remember this, Emma. What they did was never about you, not being worthy of investment. It was about them being afraid of your independence. You've always been the strong one, the one they couldn't control. That terrifies people like your father." On the drive home, her words echoed in my mind. I'd spent years believing that being the responsible child meant being less loved, less valued. But what if it actually meant being feared? The thought was strangely empowering. My apartment felt different when I returned, not just a place I slept between classes and shifts, but a war room. I spread the documents from Grandma Eleanor across my small dining table, alongside the bank statements from Mrs. Patel. Hour after hour, I read through everything, making notes, connecting dots, building a picture of what had happened and what could be done. The original account agreement was explicit, for the educational expenses of Emma Jean Wilson. There was even a clause requiring documentation of educational purpose for large withdrawals, a clause my parents had apparently circumvented through a series of smaller transactions before escalating to larger ones. More revealing were the emails Grandma Eleanor had printed, exchanges between her and my father dating back years, in which he repeatedly inquired about flexibility in my grandfather's trust, suggesting that the education requirement was outdated and unnecessarily restrictive. In each exchange, my grandmother firmly maintained the terms, reminding him that they were my grandfather's wishes and legally binding. As midnight approached, my phone lit up with a text from Sophia. "Parents having huge fight about money. Dad. Keep saying Eleanor can't prove anything. What's happening?" I felt a surge of satisfaction. Grandma Eleanor was right. They were scrambling, making mistakes. I texted back, "Tell you tomorrow. Don't get involved." Sunday morning, Zach called. My best friend since freshman year, he was one of the few people who truly understood my complicated family dynamics. "Hey, you've been MIA. Everything okay?" I hesitated. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that I hadn't thought about who else to bring into my confidence. But if there was anyone I could trust with this, it was Zach. "Not really," I admitted. "My parents emptied my college fund for Sophia's wedding. I'm trying to figure out how to pay tuition." His sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of creative profanity that actually made me laugh for the first time in days. "That's beyond messed up, Em. What can I do?" "Actually," I said, an idea forming, "there is something. How are your acting skills?" I played Mercutio in high school, died dramatically." "Why?" "Because I need someone to come with me to a bank meeting tomorrow. Someone my parents won't recognize or suspect. Someone who can look professionally intimidating while sitting quietly and taking notes." "Like a lawyer?" I could hear the grin in his voice. "Exactly like a lawyer. Specifically, like a lawyer helping a college student navigate financial abuse by her family." "I have a suit," he said immediately. "And I can look serious while writing random stuff in a notepad. Count me in." When I returned to Grandma Eleanor's, that afternoon, I had a plan. Not just for the bank meeting, but for what would come after. She listened without interruption as I laid it out, step by step. When I finished, she nodded once, decisively. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "Now, let's make one adjustment." By Monday morning, I was ready. Dressed in the most professional outfit I owned, a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt and tailored pants, I met Zach outside First Community Bank. He looked almost unrecognizable in a charcoal suit, hair neatly combed, a leather portfolio under his arm. "Ms. Wilson," he said formally, extending his hand with a solemn expression that only cracked into a slight smile when I rolled my eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson," I replied, playing along. "Wouldn't miss it. Ready to make some bankers? Uncomfortable and your parents regret every decision they've ever made?" I took a deep breath. More than ready. Mrs. Patel was waiting in the lobby, along with a man in a pinstriped suit who introduced himself as Mr. Everett from the legal department. They ushered us into a conference room where, to my surprise, another familiar face was waiting. "Uncle James?" I blurted out. My father's brother rose to greet me, his expression grave but kind. "Emma, Eleanor called me yesterday. I hope you don't mind my joining this meeting." I glanced at Grandma Eleanor, who merely nodded, a subtle confirmation that this was the adjustment she'd mentioned. Uncle James was a successful business attorney in the next county, someone my father simultaneously respected and resented for his more straightforward success. "Not at all," I said, recovering quickly. "This is my friend Zach Thompson, who's here to support me and take notes." As everyone settled around the table, Mrs. Patel opened a folder in front of her. "I want to thank you all for coming. As I explained to Miss Wilson last week, we have concerns about the recent activity on her educational savings account." Mr. Everett cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I should clarify that while First Community Bank takes the appropriate use of designated accounts very seriously, we also must operate within legal parameters. The account in question lists Robert and Linda Wilson as co-signers, with full access until certain conditions are met." "We understand the legal parameters," Uncle James said smoothly. "We're more concerned with the ethical obligations, particularly given the explicit purpose of the account." Mrs. Patel nodded. "The account was established specifically for Emma's educational expenses. The recent withdrawals totaling over $41,000 appear to have been used for expenses related to another family member's wedding, which violates the spirit, if not the letter, of the account agreement," Grandma Eleanor added. The meeting continued for nearly an hour, a careful dance of legal terminology and banking policies. Mr. Everett explained that while the bank couldn't reverse the withdrawals, without Robert and Linda's consent, they could flag the account for potential misuse. Uncle James outlined options for civil recovery, his voice calm but authoritative as he detailed how a case could be made for financial abuse. Throughout it all, Zach sat quietly beside me, methodically taking notes and occasionally leaning over to whisper a question in my ear, playing his part perfectly, creating the impression of legal strategy being formulated in real time. As the meeting wound down, Mrs. Patel leaned forward. "There is one other matter that might be relevant. The most recent withdrawal attempt was declined." My head snapped up. "Attempt? What attempt?" "Yesterday afternoon, your father attempted to withdraw the remaining balance, $843.27. Our system flagged it due to the new alert we placed on the account after your visit last week. The transaction was temporarily held for review." I exchanged glances with Grandma Eleanor. So they were still trying to drain every last penny, even after I'd confronted them. Any lingering doubt about their intentions evaporated. "What happens to that money now?" I asked. "The hold is temporary. We'll need to make a determination within 48 hours, Uncle James interjected. "Given the circumstances and the clear documentation of the account's intended purpose, I believe the bank has grounds to deny the withdrawal and, potentially, to investigate whether the previous withdrawals constituted misuse of designated educational funds." Mr. Everett looked uncomfortable. "That would be unusual without a court order." "Not as unusual as you might think," Uncle James countered, "particularly given recent regulatory focus on preventing financial exploitation. I'm sure First Community Bank would prefer to be seen as proactively protecting its customers rather than enabling potential abuse." The subtle pressure worked. By the end of the meeting, the bank had agreed to maintain the hold on the remaining funds, to provide complete documentation of all withdrawals for potential legal action, and, most significantly, to send formal notification to my parents that the account was under review for potential misuse. As we gathered our things to leave, Mrs. Patel pulled me aside. "For what it's worth, Miss Wilson, I think you're handling this with remarkable composure. Many people twice your age wouldn't show such restraint." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her concern. "It helps to have support." Outside in the parking lot, Uncle James clasped my shoulder. "You did well in there, Emma. Very well. Now, are you ready for phase 2? I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The bank meeting had been just the beginning, the opening move in a game my parents didn't yet realize we were playing. "They'll be getting the bank's notification today or tomorrow," Uncle James continued. "Eleanor and I think it's best if we move quickly after that. The element of surprise works in our favor." "Agreed," I said. "Tomorrow evening then? 7 o'clock? "We'll be ready," Grandma Eleanor confirmed. "James will pick me up. Zach, can you drive Emma?" Zach nodded solemnly, still partly in character. "Absolutely, Mrs. Wilson. She'll arrive precisely on time and looking even more intimidating than today." As they departed, I found myself alone with Zach in the parking lot. The professional facade we'd both maintained during the meeting crumbled as he pulled me into a tight hug. "That was intense," he murmured into my hair. "You okay?" For the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of everything. The betrayal, the fear, the uncertainty, the strange new power I was claiming. It crashed over me in a wave, and I clung to him, grateful for the solid presence of someone who wanted nothing from me except my well-being. "I will be," I promised, pulling back to meet his eyes. "Tomorrow night, one way or another, this all changes." What I didn't say, what I barely admitted to myself, was that I was no longer just fighting to recover my money. I was fighting to redefine my place in my family, to force recognition of my worth, to claim the respect I'd earned but never been given. Tomorrow night, at my parents' house, Surrounded by the allies I'd gathered, I would confront not just the theft of my college fund, but the lifelong pattern it represented. And I was ready. The following day passed in a blur of classes and preparation. I had emails to write, documents to organize, and one crucial phone call to make. In between it all, texts from my parents arrived with increasing frequency. First, casual inquiries about when I'd be ready to discuss things reasonably. Then thinly veiled demands that I come home immediately. And finally, by late afternoon, barely contained panic as the notification from First Community Bank arrived in their mailbox. Emma Jean Wilson, my father's text read, using my full name as if I were a misbehaving child. What have you done? Call me right now. I didn't call. Instead, I focused on my strategy for the evening, reviewing the notes I'd made with Grandma Eleanor and Uncle James. At precisely 6:30, Zach arrived at my apartment, once again impeccably dressed in his suit. Ready for the showdown? He asked, attempting levity though his eyes reflected concern. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, gathering my portfolio of documents. I'd dressed carefully, professional but not formal, my grandmother's advice, echoing in my head, don't look like you're trying too hard, but make sure they understand you're not a child they can dismiss. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal, the familiar streets of Riverside looking somehow different, as if the landscape itself had shifted along with my perception of my family. When we pulled into the driveway, I noted 3 cars already, parked there, my parents' vehicles, and Uncle James's sleek sedan. They're here, I murmured, a mixture of nerves and determination washing over me. Zach squeezed my hand. Remember, you hold the cards now, not them. We walked to the front, door together, and I used my key one last time, a symbolic act that I recognized even as I did it. After tonight, regardless of the outcome, I would no longer think of this house as my home. Voices drifted from the living room, raised, argumentative. As Zach and I entered, the conversation cut off abruptly. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward us, my parents looking flushed and defensive, Grandma Eleanor, regal in her calm composure, and Uncle James, whose professionally neutral expression gave nothing away. Emma, my mother started, rising from the sofa with forced brightness. And I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. This is Zach, I said simply, not bothering with further explanation. Thank you all for being here. My father scoffed, his face reddening. Like we had a choice? Your grandmother and uncle show up unannounced, refuse to explain anything until you arrive, and meanwhile the bank is sending us notices about account reviews and potential legal action. What kind of game are you playing? No game, Dad, I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Just finally addressing some long overdue truths. We arranged ourselves around the living room, my parents on the sofa, Grandma Eleanor in an armchair, Uncle James standing near the fireplace, and Zach and I taking positions directly across from my parents. The coffee table between us was covered with papers my grandmother and uncle had apparently already laid out. Bank statements, account agreements, and legal documents I didn't recognize. Let's get right to the point, I began, opening my own portfolio. 3 months ago, you began systematically emptying my college fund. Money I've saved since I was 10 years old. Money explicitly designated for my education, to pay for Sophia's wedding. Now, Emma, my mother interjected, we've already explained that we intended to replace. Please let me finish, I said, not unkindly but firmly. When I confronted you about it, you dismissed my concerns, suggested I take a semester off or take out loans, and made it clear that my education was less important than Sophia's wedding. My father leaned forward. That's not what we said. You're twisting our words. Actually, Uncle James spoke up, based on the text messages Emma shared with us, that's precisely what you communicated, Robert. I continued before my father could argue. What you may not have realized is that your actions triggered several consequences. First, the bank flagged the unusual withdrawal pattern as potentially fraudulent. Second, upon learning the purpose of those withdrawals, they've initiated a review for misuse of designated educational funds. I placed a document on the coffee table, sliding it toward them. This is a formal complaint I've prepared, detailing the chronology of events and the impact of your actions on my educational future. I have not yet filed it. My mother's hand trembled as she picked up the paper. Filed it where? With the civil court, Uncle James answered for me. It would initiate a case for financial abuse and breach of fiduciary duty. This is ridiculous, my father sputtered, his face growing redder. You can't sue your own parents. Actually, she can, Grandma Eleanor interjected, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. And based on the evidence she's gathered, she would likely prevail. A heavy silence fell over the room as my parents exchanged alarmed glances. My father's bluster seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by something I rarely saw in him: uncertainty. "What do you want, Emma?" he finally asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring a tantrum rather than addressing a legitimate grievance. I pulled out the next document from my portfolio, the one Grandma Eleanor, Uncle James, and I had drafted together the previous day. I want 3 things. First, full restitution of the money taken from my account. Second, a formal arrangement that removes both of you as co-signers from any of my financial accounts. And third, acknowledgement of what happened and why it was wrong. My father started to scoff, but my mother laid a restraining hand on his arm. She'd always been more perceptive, more adept at reading which way the wind was blowing. "And if we agree to these terms," she asked cautiously, "then I won't pursue legal action. We can handle this as a family matter, privately and with dignity." "Where exactly do you expect us to get $40,000? My father demanded. "It's not like we have that kind of money just sitting around." "You had it 3 months ago," I pointed out, "before you spent it on floral arrangements and cocktail hours." "The wedding deposits are non-refundable," my mother said, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "And the remaining payments are due next week." "That's not Emma's problem," Grandma Eleanor said firmly. "You created this situation, Linda. You and Robert." My father turned to my grandmother, his expression darkening. "This is your doing, isn't it? Filling her head with ideas about suing her own family. You've always tried to turn my children against me." "No, Robert," she replied calmly. "You've managed that entirely on your own." Before he could respond, Zach cleared his throat and spoke for the first time. "If I may," he said, his voice carrying a professional authority that belied his age. "There's another consideration here that hasn't been mentioned yet." All eyes turned to him, including mine. We hadn't rehearsed this part. The account in question was established with specific educational intent. Funds misappropriated from such accounts can potentially trigger not just civil penalties, but also tax consequences. Educational savings accounts typically carry tax advantages that don't apply when the money is used for non-educational purposes. My father's face went from red to pale. If there was one thing he feared more than family conflict, it was IRS scrutiny. "Tax consequences?" he repeated weakly. Uncle James nodded, picking up the thread seamlessly. "Indeed. Depending on how the withdrawals were reported, or not reported, there could be significant tax liabilities, potentially including penalties for improper use of tax-advantaged educational funds." I shot Zach a grateful look. His pre-law studies were coming in handy in ways neither of us had anticipated. "The point," I said, redirecting the conversation, "is that this situation has multiple dimensions, none of which reflect well on your decision-making. But I'm offering a straightforward resolution." "$40,000, my father muttered. "You might as well ask for the moon." Actually, Grandma Eleanor interjected, there is another option. She exchanged a meaningful look with Uncle James before continuing. The Brooks family, Sophia's future in-laws, they're quite well off, aren't they? Perhaps they'd be willing to contribute to the wedding costs directly, especially if they understood the situation. My mother gasped. We can't tell the Brooks about this. They'd think that you misappropriated your younger daughter's education fund to impress them with an extravagant wedding? Grandma Eleanor finished for her. Yes, I imagine they might. The room fell silent again as my parents visibly worked through their limited options. I maintained my composure, though internally I marveled at the shifting power dynamic. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one scrambling to accommodate my parents' decisions. They were the ones facing consequences, weighing unpleasant choices. We need to discuss this privately, my father finally said. Of course, I agreed. We'll give you some time to consider the proposal. As we moved to leave the room, my mother suddenly called out, Emma, please, can't we just talk about this? Just you and me, mother to daughter? I paused, considering. Part of me, a larger part than I wanted to admit, longed for reconciliation, for understanding, for the mother-daughter bond that had always felt just out of reach. But another part, the part that had grown stronger through this ordeal, recognized the manipulation in her request. We are talking about it, I said gently. All of us, together, with everything on the table. That's the only way forward now. We gave them 20 minutes alone, waiting in the kitchen where Grandma Eleanor made tea as if this were any ordinary family visit. When we returned to the living room, my parents sat close together on the sofa, their postures revealing defeat. Before they spoke a word. We can return the money, my father said without preamble. But not all at once. We'll need to make monthly payments. Starting with how much? Uncle James asked. $5,000 now, from our emergency fund. The rest in installments. I shook my head. My tuition is due in 3 weeks. I need at least $20,000 immediately. We don't have it, my father exploded, then immediately reined himself in when Uncle James raised an eyebrow. We genuinely don't have that kind of liquidity right now. What about the Brooks? Grandma Eleanor pressed. Surely they could advance some of the wedding costs directly. My mother's face crumpled. We already asked them to contribute more last week when we realized we were coming up short. Tyler's father agreed to pay for the rehearsal dinner, but made it very clear he felt we were overextending. She looked away, embarrassment evident in her posture. He said perhaps we should consider a more modest celebration. So, there it was. The truth behind their increasingly desperate withdrawals from my account. They had been trying to maintain an illusion of financial capability to present themselves as equals to the Brooks family, and the facade was crumbling. A new voice suddenly joined the conversation. What if we canceled the destination weekend? We all turned to see Sophia standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of determination and distress. I hadn't heard her arrive, hadn't even known she was coming, but her presence shifted the energy in the room instantly. Sophia, honey, my mother began, this doesn't concern... It absolutely concerns me, Sophia interrupted, stepping fully into the room. It's my wedding that's being paid for with Emma's stolen money. My father winced at the word stolen, but Sophia continued, moving to stand beside me. I spoke with Tyler. We don't want a wedding built on this kind of foundation. We're scaling back, significantly. The venue deposit is non-refundable, but we're canceling all the extra events, the destination weekend, everything that hasn't been paid for yet. She turned to face me directly. It won't recover everything they took, but it's a start, and it's the right thing to do. I hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated Sophia taking such a definitive stand, putting my needs before her wedding. Dreams. It was a side of my sister I'd rarely seen, one that made me wonder how much our family dynamics had shaped both of us in ways neither of us had fully recognized. "Thank you," I said simply, reaching out to squeeze her hand. My mother was shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. "But Sophia, your perfect day will be perfect because I'm marrying the man I love," Sophia cut her off firmly. "Not because we spent a fortune trying to impress people." The tension in the room shifted again, a palpable release as my sister's decision removed one of the major obstacles to resolution. My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them before my father cleared his throat. "All right, with what we saved from scaling back the wedding, plus our emergency fund, we can transfer $15,000 immediately. The remainder will come in monthly payments of $2,000, starting next month." Uncle James pulled out a notepad. "Let's put that in writing, shall we? Along with the removal of Robert and Linda as co-signers on any of Emma's accounts." As they worked out the details, Sophia moved to sit beside me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." "I know," I assured her. "No, not just about the money. I mean about everything. All these years I never really saw how they treated you differently. I just accepted that I was the princess and you were the responsible one. I never questioned why." Her words touched something deep inside me, a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. "It's not your fault," I said. "We were both playing the roles they assigned us." "Well, I'm done with that role," she said firmly. "And Tyler is too. He was horrified when I told him what happened. Actually," she hesitated, a small smile forming, "he's the one who suggested we elope instead. Just us, somewhere meaningful, no audience required." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Seriously? What about his parents? The Brooks family image?" Sophia laughed softly. "Turns out Tyler's been feeling as pressured as I have about this whole production. His exact words were, 'Let's just get married and use the money we save for something that actually matters.' I think that's why I'm marrying him." For the first time in days, I felt something like hope, not just for my immediate financial situation, but for the possibility of a new kind of relationship with my sister, one built on mutual respect, rather than competition. Across the room, papers were being signed, arrangements formalized. My parents looked subdued, perhaps finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had done. Grandma Eleanor watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction, occasionally catching my eye with an approving nod. When the documents were complete, my father handed me a signed check for $15,000, a significant portion of what had been taken, though far from all of it. More importantly, he and my mother had signed forms removing themselves as co-signers from any accounts in my name, relinquishing the control they had abused. "There's one more thing," I said, addressing my parents directly. "The third condition I mentioned, acknowledgement." My father looked away, his jaw tightening. My mother's eyes filled with fresh tears. Neither spoke. "I need to hear you say it," I pressed gently, "that what you did was wrong, not just legally or practically, but morally." "Emma," my father began, his voice strained, "we've signed the papers. We're returning the money. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said simply, "it's not." Silence stretched between us, taut and uncomfortable. Finally, my mother reached for my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "We were wrong," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "We took what wasn't ours to take. We prioritized appearances over your future, and we've been doing it for longer than just these past few months." She glanced at my father, then back to me. "I am so sorry, Emma. Truly sorry." The words I had waited so long to hear, not just about the money, but about the years of subtle neglect, of being valued less, of having my needs considered secondary, washed over me like a wave, bringing both pain and release. My father remained, silent, his expression closed. Uncle James cleared his throat pointedly, and my father finally spoke, the words emerging reluctantly. "It was wrong. We shouldn't have taken your money." A pause, then, with visible effort, "I'm sorry." It wasn't everything I had hoped for, not the full recognition of the deeper patterns that had shaped our family dynamics, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that boundaries had been crossed and harm had been done. As we prepared to leave, Grandma Eleanor pulled me into a fierce hug. "I am so proud of you," she murmured. "Your grandfather would be too." "Thank you," I whispered back, "for everything." Outside, the night air felt clean and fresh, a world of possibility opening before me. With the $15,000 check in my portfolio, I had enough to cover most of my immediate tuition needs. The payment plan would secure the rest. My education, my future, was no longer in jeopardy. But I had gained something even more valuable, a new understanding of my own worth and the courage to defend it. The family dynamics that had defined me for so long had been exposed, challenged, and fundamentally altered. Whether those changes would lead to healing or further separation remained to be seen. But for the first time, I felt I was operating from a position of genuine strength, rather than desperate accommodation. As Zach drove me back to my apartment, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Not just the confrontation and resolution, but the unexpected moments of connection with Sophia, the steadfast support of Grandma Eleanor and Uncle James, the professional confidence Zach had demonstrated on my behalf. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said as we neared my place. "I don't feel angry anymore. I thought I would, even after getting what I wanted. But instead, I just feel clear. Like I can finally see everything for what it is." Zach nodded, his eyes on the road. "That's what happens when you stand up for yourself. You realize you had the power all along." "It's not over," I acknowledged. "There's a lot to figure out with my family, a lot of history to work through." "But you'll do it from a position of strength now," he said, echoing my earlier thoughts. "They know they can't just run you over anymore." As we pulled up to my apartment building, a text came through on my phone. It was from Sophia. "Proud of you today. What you did took courage. Let's get coffee this weekend, just us? Love you, sis." I smiled, showing Zach the message. Some good came out of this after all. He grinned. "See? Lawyer Thompson gets results." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its lightness. "Thank you for today, for everything." "Anytime," he said simply. "That's what friends are for." As I walked toward my building, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. Not the passive acceptance I had mistaken for maturity in the past, but a genuine equilibrium born of standing my ground and claiming my worth. My future was mine again, not just financially, but in every sense that mattered. Tomorrow, I would deposit the check and meet with Mr. Chen at financial aid. I would secure my place in the fall semester and continue the education my parents had tried to derail. And in the coming weeks and months, I would carefully rebuild my relationship with my family, not on the old foundation of imbalance and unspoken resentments, but on something new, something truer. The story of my stolen college fund wasn't over yet, but the next chapters would be written on my terms, with my voice, finally, fully heard. The following week unfolded with a strange new rhythm. Each morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that felt unfamiliar yet empowering. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a clear path forward, not an easy one, but one I could navigate on my own terms. On Monday, I deposited my parents' check and met with Mr. Chen at the financial aid office. His eyebrows rose when I explained the developments. "That's quite a resolution," he said, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought. "Not many students your age would have had the courage to confront their parents so directly." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I didn't have much choice. There's always a choice, he corrected gently. Most people would have taken the path of least resistance, dropped out for a semester, accumulated debt, or simply given up. You chose to fight for your future. With the $15,000 from my parents and some restructuring of my financial aid package, I had enough to cover the upcoming semester's tuition. The monthly payments, which Uncle James had formalized in a legally binding agreement, would secure the rest of what I needed to graduate. You're back on track, Mr. Chen concluded, closing my file with a satisfied nod. Though I suspect the journey has changed you. His observation stayed with me as I left his office and walked across campus. The journey had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The Emma who had received that first call from Mrs. Patel seemed like a different person now, someone who had accepted limitations I no longer recognized. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Tyler and I are meeting with the venue tomorrow to cancel the extra events. Want to come? Could use your support. I hesitated only briefly before replying, Of course. What time? Her response was, Immediate. 11 a.m. Thank you, Em. This means a lot. This new alliance with my sister was perhaps the most unexpected outcome of the entire ordeal. All our lives, we had been cast as opposites. The responsible one and the charming one, the practical one and the dreamer. Those roles had kept us in separate orbits, neither fully seeing the other. Now, without those familiar scripts to follow, we were discovering the possibility of a different kind of relationship. Tuesday found me sitting beside Sophia in the elegant offices of Pinecrest Gardens, watching as she calmly explained to the event coordinator that they were dramatically scaling back their wedding plans. We'll keep the basic ceremony package, she said with a confidence I'd never heard in her voice before. But we're canceling the welcome dinner, farewell brunch, and all the additional services. Ms. Winters, the coordinator, looked distressed. But Miss Wilson, your mother specifically requested our premium package. The plans have been in place for months. Cancellations at this stage will still incur significant fees. I understand, Sophia replied evenly. But my fiancé and I have decided to take our celebration in a different direction, one that better reflects our values. I couldn't help but admire her composure, the quiet dignity with which she was dismantling the extravaganza our parents had pushed for. This was a Sophia I barely recognized, thoughtful, decisive, unswayed by the prospect of disappointing others. Your parents will be quite upset, Ms. Winters tried again. Perhaps you should discuss this with them before making such drastic changes? Sophia smiled, reaching over to take my hand. My family and I have already had some very honest conversations about this wedding. We're all aligned now on what matters most. After the meeting, as we walked to the parking lot, I finally asked the question that had been hovering between us. Are you really okay with all this? Giving up your dream wedding? Sophia stopped walking, turning to face me directly. Emma, you need to understand something. That extravagant production was never my dream. It was Mom and Dad's, their vision of what a Wilson family wedding should be, their attempt to impress the Brooks and everyone else. But you seemed so excited about it all, the destination weekend, the multiple events. She shrugged, a wry smile playing at her lips. I got caught up in it. It's easy to confuse what you're supposed to want with what you actually want. You know? I did know. I'd spent years believing that academic achievement and financial responsibility were the only contributions I could make to our family, the only ways I could matter. Just as Sophia had believed her value lay in social grace and meeting expectations. So what do you actually want? I asked. Her smile broadened into something genuine. Tyler and I have been talking about it a lot. We're thinking of something small at Grandma Eleanor's, just family and close friends in her garden. Simple, meaningful. She hesitated, then added, "We'd still like you to be my maid of honor, if you want to." The offer caught me by surprise. In all the wedding planning drama of the past months, I had been assigned a perfunctory role, a bridesmaid among many, positioned well down the line from Sophia's college friends and future sisters-in-law. The maid of honor position had gone to her roommate from freshman year, a girl who shared her love of social media and designer shoes. "What about Madison?" I asked, referring to the previously appointed maid of honor. Sophia looked away, a flash of discomfort crossing her face. Madison was upset about the scaled-back wedding. She said if we weren't doing the destination weekend in wine country, she didn't see the point of being involved. Sophia's air quotes and eye roll conveyed exactly what she thought of that response. Turns out, some friendships are conditional on maintaining a certain lifestyle. "And you want me instead?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. "Emma," she said softly, "you're the only person in my life right now who has shown me what integrity actually looks like. Of course I want you beside me." Her words touched something deep inside me, a space where the old hurt of being second best had lived for so long. "I'd be honored," I said, meaning it. On the drive back to campus, Sophia asked about my plans for the coming semester. I told her about the arrangement with the financial aid office, the monthly payments our parents would be making, my determination to graduate on schedule despite the setback. "And after graduation?" she asked. "Still planning on that tech firm in Seattle?" I hesitated. The Seattle job had been my goal for years, a position at a prestigious tech company that recruited heavily from Westridge, offering salaries that would ensure I never had to depend on anyone else financially. But lately, I'd been questioning whether I had chosen that path because I truly wanted it or because it represented security and independence. "I'm not sure anymore," I admitted. "I'm keeping my options open." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Tyler and I have been talking about that too. What comes after the wedding? His family expects him to join the family business, but he's not sure that's what he wants." "What does he want?" "To open a small architecture firm focusing on sustainable design. It would mean a much more modest lifestyle than his parents envision for us, but..." She trailed off, shrugging. "But it would be your life, not theirs," I finished for her. "Exactly." She glanced over at me, a hint of vulnerability in her expression. "It's scary, though. Disappointing people." I laughed softly. "Tell me about it." When she dropped me off at my apartment, Sophia hugged me tightly. "Thank you for coming today, for supporting me even after everything." "That's what sisters do," I replied, surprising myself with how right the words felt. As the week progressed, my parents maintained a careful distance. The initial $15,000 had been transferred as promised, but beyond that, our communication was minimal. A text from my mother asking if I had received the funds. A brief email from my father confirming the date of the first monthly payment. It was clear they were still processing what had happened, still adjusting to this new dynamic where I had set boundaries they couldn't cross. I was still processing too. Years of family patterns couldn't be undone in a single confrontation, no matter how cathartic. There were moments when doubt crept in, when I wondered if I had gone too far, been too harsh. But then I would remember the dismissive way my father had suggested I drop out for a semester, the casualness with which they had sacrificed my future, and my resolve would strengthen again. On Friday afternoon, Mrs. Patel called to inform me that the hold on the remainder of my account had been made permanent. "Your parents will not be able to access those funds," she confirmed. "We've also flagged your account to prevent any similar attempts in the future." "Thank you," I said, grateful for her continued support. "For everything." "You're welcome, Miss Wilson. And if I may say so, your handling of this situation has been exemplary. Many of our younger clients could learn from your example." Her approval meant more than I expected. Throughout this ordeal, I had been surrounded by adults who treated me as an equal. Mrs. Patel, Uncle James, Grandma Eleanor, in stark contrast to my parents, who had continued to view me as a child whose resources they could commandeer at will. The difference was illuminating. Saturday morning, I met Grandma Eleanor for breakfast at her favorite cafe in the historic district. She looked elegant as always, her silver hair swept into a chignon, her posture perfect as she sipped her tea. "James tells me everything is proceeding as planned with the payments," she said once we had ordered. "Robert made quite a fuss about the legal agreement, but ultimately signed." "He didn't have much choice," I noted. "No, he didn't." A satisfied smile played at the corners of her mouth. "It's good for him, having to face consequences. The problem with your father has always been that he's charming enough to talk his way out of any difficulty. Until now." I stirred my coffee, considering her words. "What was he like as a child?" I asked, realizing I'd never really wondered about my father's own upbringing, the forces that had shaped him. Grandma Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Bright, charismatic, everyone's favorite. Teachers, neighbors, even strangers would comment on what a delightful boy he was. Your grandfather and I tried to ensure he understood that charm wasn't a substitute for character, but..." She sighed. "Perhaps we failed in that regard." "And now?" I prompted. "Now he's a grown man who has never fully learned that actions have consequences. Who believes rules apply to others but not to him. Who values appearances over substance." Her gaze sharpened as she looked at me. "Which is why what you did was so important, Emma. Not just for yourself, but for him." "You think he'll learn from this?" I asked, skeptical. She considered the question carefully. "I think he's capable of learning. Whether he will choose to is another matter entirely. But you've given him the opportunity, and that's no small thing." As we ate, our conversation shifted to lighter topics. My courses for the fall semester, Sophia's revised wedding plans, the book Grandma Eleanor was reading for her neighborhood book club. It felt normal, comfortable, a pocket of family connection untainted by the recent drama. "I've been meaning to ask," I said as we finished our meal, "about Grandpa's trust. You mentioned there was money set aside for me when I graduate?" "Yes," she confirmed. "Your grandfather established trusts for all his grandchildren. Education was very important to him. He was the first in his family to attend college, and he never forgot the opportunities it afforded him." "How much is in the trust?" I asked, the question that had been nagging at me since she first mentioned its existence. Grandma Eleanor studied me for a moment, as if assessing whether I was ready for the information. "Enough to give you a significant start in life," she finally said. "The original amount was $100,000, but with investment growth over the years, it's considerably more now." I nearly choked on my last sip of coffee. "100,000? Plus growth?" She nodded, seemingly unsurprised by my reaction. "Your grandfather believed in planning for the future, and he particularly believed in you, Emma. Even when you were small, he noted your thoughtfulness, your careful way of observing before acting. He said you had the makings of someone who would use resources wisely." The revelation stunned me. All these years, there had been this substantial financial security waiting for me upon graduation, a cushion that would allow me to make choices based on what I truly wanted, not just what offered the most immediate security. And my father had tried to prevent me from accessing it by undermining my education. "Dad knew exactly how much was in the trust, didn't he?" I asked, the pieces falling into place. "Of course," Grandma Eleanor confirmed. "He's been fixated on it for years. After your grandfather passed, Robert tried to contest the will, arguing that as your father, he should control your trust until you turned 25 or even 30. The court disagreed, upholding the original terms, that you would gain access upon completing your undergraduate degree." The calculation behind my parents' actions became even clearer. By emptying my college fund and forcing me to drop out, they wouldn't just delay my graduation, they would potentially cut off my access to a significantly larger sum that was completely beyond their reach. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. Grandma Eleanor's eyes held a glint of her characteristic wisdom. "Would it have changed how you approached your education? Your career plans?" I considered the question honestly. Would knowing I had a substantial financial cushion waiting for me have altered my choices? Made me less driven, less focused on building security through my own efforts? Maybe, I admitted. I might have felt less pressure to choose the most lucrative career path. "Precisely," she nodded. "Your grandfather and I wanted you to develop your own work ethic, your own values around money and success. The trust was never meant to be a shortcut. It was meant to be a tool for building the life you truly want, once you were mature enough to know what that was." On the walk back to her house, I mulled over this new information. The trust changed. Everything. Not just practically in terms of my post-graduation options, but also in my understanding of my family's dynamics. My parents' persistent attempts to control my finances, their dismay at my growing independence, their desperate move to sabotage my education, all took on new significance in light of the substantial trust waiting for me. "What will you do?" Grandma Eleanor asked as we reached her front gate. "Once you have access to the trust?" I hesitated, the possibilities suddenly expanding before me. "I'm not sure yet. I need time to think about it." She smiled approvingly. "That's the right answer. Take your time. Consider your options carefully. The money isn't going anywhere." As I hugged her goodbye, she added one more piece of advice. "And Emma? Don't let this knowledge change who you are. Money is a tool, not a purpose. Your grandfather understood that. I think you do too." I carried her words with me as I walked back to campus, my mind swirling with new possibilities. The security of the trust meant I could consider paths I'd previously dismissed as impractical. Graduate school, perhaps, or a job at a smaller company doing work I found meaningful rather than just lucrative. I could take risks, follow interests, build a life based on what I valued rather than what offered the most immediate financial stability. But first, I had to finish my degree. One step at a time. The weekend passed quickly, filled with studying and shifts at my part-time jobs. I had decided to keep working despite the improved financial situation, partly from habit, partly from a stubborn determination to continue building my own resources independent of anyone else. Sunday evening, as I was finishing a paper for my advanced data structures class, my phone rang. I checked the screen, surprised to see my father's name. We hadn't spoken directly since the confrontation at their house. I answered cautiously. "Hello? Emma." His voice sounded different, subdued perhaps, or simply careful. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "I'm working on a paper, but yes, I can talk." A pause, then. "I wanted to let you know that the first regular payment will be transferred tomorrow. As agreed. You should see it in your account by Tuesday." "Thank you," I said, matching his formal tone. "I appreciate you keeping to the schedule." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him struggling with whatever he wanted to say next. Finally, I also wanted to apologize, more properly than I did that night. I sat up straighter, setting aside my laptop. This was unexpected. "I'm listening," I said, neither accepting nor rejecting the overture. He cleared his throat. "What I did, what your mother and I did, was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but us morally wrong. We took advantage of your trust and your work ethic. We prioritized appearances over your future. And when confronted, I dismissed your concerns instead of taking responsibility." The admission, delivered without excuses or qualifications, caught me off guard. This didn't sound like the father I knew, the man who always had a justification. who could spin any situation to make himself appear reasonable. "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Since that night, I mean." He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of recent realizations. "Several things. Sophia's decision to scale back the wedding was a wake-up call. She said she didn't want to start her marriage with a celebration built on. Those were her exact words. Built on stealing from her sister. That hit hard." I remained silent, letting him continue. "And your grandmother. She invited me for lunch yesterday, just the two of us. We talked about patterns, about how I've treated money and family throughout my life. She asked me what kind of relationship I wanted with my daughters going forward. This, too, was news to me. Grandma Eleanor hadn't mentioned meeting with my father when we had breakfast. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That I want to be someone my daughters can respect," he said simply, "and that I'm obviously not that person right now." The vulnerability in his voice was so unfamiliar that I found myself momentarily speechless. My father had always projected confidence, even arrogance. Hearing him acknowledge failure, express genuine regret, it was like listening to a stranger. "I appreciate the apology," I finally said, careful not to rush to forgiveness. "It matters. That you understand why what happened was wrong. But rebuilding trust will take time." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for instant forgiveness, just a chance to do better." After we hung up, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing the conversation. My father's apology seemed genuine, more genuine than anything I could remember hearing from him in years. Whether it represented a meaningful change or just a temporary response to being caught and exposed remained to be seen. But it was at least a start. My mother called the next day as I was walking between classes. Unlike my father's careful, measured approach, she launched immediately into an emotional outpouring. "Emma, I've been wanting to call you for days, but your father thought we should give you space, and I wasn't sure what to say anyway. But I need you to know how sorry I am, how horrible I feel about all of this." "Mom," I interrupted gently, "take a breath." She did, a shaky inhale audible over the phone. "Sorry, I keep thinking about what we did, what it must have felt like for you, finding out that way. I'm so ashamed." Her remorse seemed genuine, but there was something about it that felt incomplete, focused more on her feelings of guilt than on understanding the impact of her actions. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question I'd been wanting to ask since that first confrontation. "Not just how could you take my money, but why didn't you even talk to me about it?" "Why didn't you ask?" A long silence followed, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller. I think I was afraid you'd say no. And then we'd have to admit to Sophia, to the Brooks, to everyone, that we couldn't afford the wedding we'd committed to." "So it was about saving face?" "Partly," she admitted. "But also, your father and I have never been good at setting limits with Sophia. She gets excited about something, and we get caught up in her excitement, and before we know it, we're in over our heads. It's a pattern we've never managed to break." It was the most honest assessment of their parenting dynamics I'd ever heard from her. "And with me?" I prompted. "What's our pattern?" Another pause, then. "With you, we've always taken your responsibility for granted. Expected you to be the practical one, the one who would understand, who wouldn't make demands." Her voice caught. "We've taken advantage of your maturity, Emma, for years." The acknowledgement was both validating and painful, confirmation of what I had sensed but never heard articulated. "Yes," I said simply. "You have." "I want to do better," she said, echoing my father's words from the night before. "For both my daughters. I just don't know if you can ever trust us again." I considered her question carefully. Trust, once broken, couldn't simply be declared restored. It had to be rebuilt, brick by brick, through consistent actions over time. "I don't know either," I replied honestly, "but I'm willing to see what happens next. That's all I can offer right now." As I ended the call and continued toward my next class, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few short weeks. The financial crisis had been largely resolved, with mechanisms in place to ensure my education could continue. My relationship with Sophia had evolved into something more authentic and equal. And my parents, for perhaps the first time, were confronting the consequences of their actions and the patterns that had defined our family. Whether these changes would prove lasting remained to be seen. People could express regret in a moment of crisis, make promises when cornered, only to revert to old behaviors once the pressure eased. But regardless of my parents' future choices, I had changed permanently. I had found my voice, set boundaries, and discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. As I settled into my seat for advanced financial analysis, a class that suddenly held new relevance given my upcoming trust, I felt a sense of possibility that had been missing from my careful, practical plans. The future wasn't just about security anymore. It was about choices, about building a life aligned with my values rather than dictated by fears or others' expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Zach. "Coffee after class? Need your brain for a coding problem." Smiled, typing back, "Only if you're buying." My financial advisors insist I maintain a budget despite my improved circumstances. His response came immediately. "Deal. Though I expect your stock tips once you're a trust fund kid." I laughed out loud, earning a curious glance from the student beside me. Trust fund kid. The label couldn't be further from how I saw myself. Money or no money, I was still Emma Wilson, determined, practical, and now, finally, the author of my own story. As the semester progressed into late April, I found myself settling into a new normal. The initial check from my parents had covered most of my immediate tuition needs, and the first 2 monthly payments had arrived precisely on schedule. A small but significant sign that perhaps my father was serious about making amends. The bank had permanently secured my remaining funds against unauthorized access, and Mrs. Patel had taken a personal interest in helping me establish new accounts with better protections. On campus, life continued with its familiar rhythms of classes, study sessions, and work shifts. But beneath the surface of routine, I was different. I moved through the world with a newfound confidence, a clarity of purpose that came from having defended my boundaries and prevailed. It was subtle, not a dramatic transformation visible to casual observers, but profound in its impact on how I experienced each day. "You seem lighter somehow," Zach commented one afternoon as we worked on a joint project in the campus library. "Less. I don't know. Weighed down?" I looked up from my laptop, considering his observation. "I guess I am. It's strange. Objectively, nothing major has changed. I'm still taking the same courses, working the same jobs, living in the same apartment, but it all feels different." "Because you stood up for yourself," he said simply. "That changes everything." He was right. The knowledge that I could face a crisis, that I could advocate for myself even against those who should have been my strongest supporters, had fundamentally altered my self-perception. The Emma who had existed before, the dutiful daughter who accepted less than she deserved, seemed like a distant memory. My relationship with Sophia continued to evolve as well. True to her word, she and Tyler had dramatically scaled back their wedding plans. Pinecrest Gardens was still the venue, but the event had been transformed from a 3-day extravaganza into a simple afternoon ceremony, followed by an intimate dinner for family and close friends. "Tyler's parents are actually relieved," Sophia confided during one of our weekly coffee meetups. "His mom told me she'd been worried about how we'd handle money in our marriage if we were starting off with such an excessive celebration. She thinks our decision shows fiscal responsibility and good character." Sophia rolled her eyes, but her smile was genuine. Apparently, the Brooks aren't as impressed by extravagance as Mom and Dad assumed. "How are Mom and Dad taking the changes?" I asked, stirring my latte. Sophia sighed. Mom's still a bit heartbroken about losing the fantasy wedding she'd planned. But Dad? He's been surprisingly supportive. He told me yesterday that he's proud of me for making hard choices. She shook her head in wonder. I can't remember. The last time he said he was proud of me for anything besides looking pretty or getting engaged. The shift in our father's attitude was something I'd noticed as well. His text messages had become more thoughtful, less performative. Last week, he'd asked about my advanced data structures project, not just a perfunctory inquiry, but specific questions that suggested he'd actually read the project description I'd mentioned in passing. It was a small thing, but markedly different from his previous interactions, which had typically focused on superficial pleasantries or financial matters. "I think he's trying," I said carefully. "Whether it lasts is another question." "That's the thing about revelations," Sophia mused. "They can hit hard in the moment, but maintaining that awareness takes work." She picked at her muffin thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about our family lately, the dynamics, the patterns, how I've benefited from being the golden child without ever questioning why." "And what have you concluded?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She met my eyes directly. "That it damaged both of us, just in different ways. Me by never having to develop real resilience or self-sufficiency. You by having to be more adult than the actual adults." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." Her insight surprised me. Not because I disagreed, but because it reflected a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected from my sister. The crisis had changed her too, it seemed. "We were both just playing the roles we were assigned," I said, echoing what I'd told her before. "The important thing is that we can choose different roles now." As April turned to May, the end of the semester loomed closer, bringing with it both the relief of completed coursework and the anticipation of Sophia's wedding in early June. I found myself immersed in final projects and exam preparation, grateful for the normalcy of academic pressure after the emotional turmoil of the past months. One Tuesday evening, as I was finishing a particularly challenging assignment in the quiet corner of the tech lab where I worked part-time, my phone rang. The screen displayed Grandma Eleanor, and I answered immediately. "Emma, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting your studies." "Not at all," I assured her. "Just finishing up some work at the lab. Everything okay?" "Perfectly fine," she said. "I was wondering if you might come to dinner this Saturday. There's something important I'd like to discuss with you." Her tone was casual, but the formal invitation gave me pause. Typically, our meetups were spontaneous or casually planned. "Of course. Should I be concerned?" "Not in the slightest," she chuckled. "Just some matters related to your grandfather's. Trust that would be better discussed in person. 6 o'clock. "I'll be there," I promised, curiosity piqued. When Saturday arrived, I found myself unusually nervous as I drove to Grandma Eleanor's house. Despite her assurance that there was nothing to worry about, the formal dinner invitation and the mention of the trust had left me with a vague sense of unease. The trust had already caused enough family drama. What more could there be to discuss? Grandma Eleanor greeted me at the door with her customary warmth, ushering me into a dining room set with her best china and crystal glasses. "I thought we'd make this a proper occasion," she explained, noting my surprised expression. "Some moments deserve a touch of ceremony." Over a delicious meal of roast chicken and seasonal vegetables, we chatted about ordinary things. My classes, her garden club, Sophia's wedding preparations. It wasn't until dessert, her famous lemon tart, that she finally broached the subject that had prompted the invitation. "Emma, do you remember when I told you about your grandfather's trust and the conditions he attached to it?" I nodded, setting down my fork. "That I gain access when I complete my undergraduate degree." "Precisely," she said, reaching for a folder that had been waiting on the sideboard. What I didn't explain fully was that there's a provision allowing for early access under certain circumstances. She opened the folder and slid a document across the table toward me. This is the relevant section of the trust agreement. Your grandfather included a clause permitting partial early disbursement in cases where the beneficiary demonstrates exceptional financial responsibility and a specific educational or career advancement purpose. I scanned the legal language, trying to make sense of the implications. Are you saying I could access some of the trust before graduation? Under the right circumstances, yes, she confirmed. The trustee, that's me, has discretion to approve early access of up to 20% of the total for specific educational purposes. My mind raced, calculating what this might mean. 20%. That would be approximately $60,000 based on current value, Grandma Eleanor said calmly, as if she weren't discussing an amount that exceeded my annual expenses several times over. I sat back, momentarily stunned. Why are you telling me this now? She regarded me thoughtfully. Because recent events have demonstrated beyond any doubt that you meet the criteria for financial responsibility. And because I believe you're mature enough to consider this option without being swayed by immediate temptation. What would I even use it for? I asked, the possibilities both overwhelming and oddly distant, as if we were discussing a theoretical scenario rather than my actual life. That's entirely your decision, she replied. Some of my suggestions might include graduate school without student loans, a professional certification program, or perhaps a study abroad opportunity that would enhance your career prospects. The key is that it must serve your educational or professional development in a substantive way. As the implications sank in, I found myself thinking not about what I could buy or do with such a sum, but about the trust it represented. Not just the financial trust, but the personal faith my grandfather had placed in me, extended now by my grandmother. This is a lot to process, I admitted. Of course it is, she agreed. I don't expect an immediate decision. In fact, I'd prefer you take time to consider whether you want to access the funds early at all. The full trust will still be available after graduation regardless. Why did Grandpa set it up this way? I asked, curious about the reasoning behind such careful provisions. Grandma Eleanor's expression softened with memory. Your grandfather believed strongly in education as a path to independence. He also believed that true financial literacy comes not just from managing limited resources, but from making thoughtful decisions about abundance. She smiled. He would say that anyone can learn to stretch a dollar when they have to. The real test of character is what you do when you have more than enough. We talked late into the evening, discussing not just the mechanics of the trust, but the philosophy behind it, the values my grandfather had hoped to instill. By the time I left, my head was spinning with possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. The drive back to my apartment felt surreal. $60,000. It wasn't enough to change my life completely, but it was enough to open doors I had assumed would remain closed for years. Graduate programs at prestigious universities, international internships, professional certifications that could accelerate my career trajectory. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the money itself. It was the realization that I didn't feel any urgent need to spend it. Unlike the desperate relief I'd felt when recovering my stolen college fund, this new financial possibility created no immediate sense of necessity. It was simply an option, a resource I could choose to use wisely or choose to leave untouched until graduation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my small desk, making lists of potential uses for the early disbursement, weighing pros and cons, researching graduate programs and professional certifications. Each option I considered had merit, but none felt quite right. Not yet. Around 2 a.m., a text came through from Sophia. "Still up? I can see you're online." I smiled at her unexpected perception. can't sleep. Big decisions on my mind. Response came immediately. Anything I can help with? I hesitated, then typed, maybe. Too complex for text. Coffee tomorrow? Absolutely. 10 a.m. at the Daily Grind? Perfect. See you then. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop to find Sophia already waiting, 2 steaming mugs on the table. I ordered your usual, she said as I slid into the chair across from her. You looked like you needed caffeine. ASAP. Thanks, I said gratefully, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. I didn't get much sleep. So what's this big decision? She asked. Is everything okay with school? School's fine, I assured her. It's about Grandpa's trust. I explained what Grandma Eleanor had shared. The early access provision, the substantial sum potentially available, the requirement that it be used for educational or professional development. As I talked, Sophia listened intently, her expression thoughtful. Wow, she said when I finished. That's a game changer. Amek, what are you thinking of doing with it? That's just it, I admitted. I've spent all night making lists of responsible, practical uses for the money. Graduate programs, certifications, study abroad experiences. They all make sense on paper, but nothing feels right. What do you mean by right? I struggled to articulate the vague dissatisfaction I felt with all my carefully reasoned options. I mean, they're all logical next steps in the career path I've been planning. But lately, I've been wondering if I chose that path because it's what I truly want, or because it represented security and independence. Sophia nodded, understanding immediately. And now that you have financial security either way, you're not sure the path is still what you want. Exactly. I was struck again by this new dimension of my sister. Her insightfulness, her ability to grasp nuances without judgment. So, if financial security wasn't a factor, she asked, what would you want to do? It was the simplest question, yet somehow the hardest to answer. What did I want, when stripped of practical considerations, family expectations, and my own carefully constructed identity as the responsible one? I don't know, I admitted. And that feels terrifying. I've always had a plan, always known exactly what the next step should be. Maybe that's your answer, Sophia suggested. Maybe instead of choosing a specific program right away, you could use some time to explore possibilities without pressure. What do you mean? She leaned forward, warming to her idea. What if you took a gap year after graduation? Used some of the trust money to travel, intern in different fields, try things you've never considered before. Not just a vacation, but intentional exploration. The suggestion caught me off guard. A gap year had never figured into my careful planning. It seemed indulgent, impractical, exactly the kind of thing the old Emma would have dismissed without consideration. I don't know, I said skeptically. Would that even qualify as educational or professional development? If structured properly, absolutely, Sophia insisted. Think about it. You could arrange short internships in different sectors, attend workshops or conferences in fields you're curious about, maybe even take specialized courses in different countries. It would be an investment in figuring out what truly inspires you. As she spoke, something shifted in my perception. What had initially sounded like an aimless delay suddenly took shape as a deliberate, purposeful exploration, not an avoidance of decisions, but a more thoughtful approach to making them. That's actually a really interesting idea, I admitted, but it's so different from anything I've ever considered. That's exactly why it might be worth doing, Sophia pointed out. Look, Em, you've spent your entire life being the practical, responsible one. You've earned the right to take some time to discover what you actually want, not just what makes logical sense. Her words resonated with a part of me I'd long suppressed, the part that occasionally wondered about roads not taken. Interests not pursued. Possibilities not explored because they didn't fit neatly into my carefully structured plans for financial independence. I need to think about this, I said, feeling both excited and unsettled by the new possibility. It's so far outside my comfort zone. Good, Sophia said firmly. The best growth happens outside comfort zones, and honestly, after everything you've been through, you deserve some time to just breathe, to figure out who Emma is when she's not in crisis mode or responsibility mode. As we continued talking, the idea began to take root in my mind. A year of intentional exploration, not aimless wandering, but structured discovery. I could divide the time into segments, perhaps. 3 months interning in different industries, 3 months of international exposure to different business cultures, 3 months of specialized workshops or short courses, and 3 months to reflect and apply what I'd learned to concrete next steps. I might actually do this, I said, surprising myself with the growing conviction in my voice. It's completely unlike me, but maybe that's exactly why it's the right choice. Sophia grinned. The old Emma would never take a gap year. But the new Emma? The one who stood up to our parents and reclaimed her future? She might. The new Emma. The phrase struck me as both accurate and revelatory. There was indeed a new Emma emerging from the crucible of recent months, someone more confident in setting boundaries, more willing to question established paths, more open to possibilities beyond the strictly practical. As we left the coffee shop, Sophia hugged me tightly. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you, and I'm here for you. That's what sisters are for. Her support meant more than I could express. This new sisterhood we were building based on mutual respect, rather than the old dynamics of golden child and responsible one. It was perhaps the most unexpected gift to emerge from the whole financial crisis, a genuine relationship with my sister. Over the following week, the gap year idea continued to evolve in my mind. I researched programs, considered potential destinations, and calculated budgets with the same thoroughness I applied to all major decisions. But underlying the practical planning was something new, a sense of genuine excitement, of possibilities opening rather than narrowing. When I met with Grandma Eleanor the following weekend to discuss my thoughts, she listened attentively to my tentative proposal for a structured year of exploration. It's different from anything I've ever planned for myself, I concluded, and I'm still not entirely sure it's the right choice, but it feels important somehow. She studied me thoughtfully, then nodded. Your grandfather would approve, she said simply. Really? I was surprised. It's not the most conventional use of the funds. Conventional? She laughed softly. Emma, your grandfather built his business by taking thoughtful risks when others played it safe. He valued education deeply, yes, but he defined it broadly, as any experience that expanded your understanding and capabilities. She reached across the table to clasp my hand. A gap year focused on purposeful exploration isn't an indulgence or a delay. It's an investment in ensuring that when you do choose a definitive path, it's truly aligned with who you are and what you value. Her validation settled something within me. Then I think that's what I want to do, I said. The decision, crystallizing as I spoke the words aloud, not running away from responsibility, but taking responsibility for discovering my authentic direction. A wise choice, she approved. And speaking of responsibility, I'd like you to prepare a formal proposal outlining your plan, the structure, the budget, the intended outcomes. Not because I doubt your judgment, but because the discipline of articulating your vision will help clarify it for yourself. I'd be happy to, I agreed, already mentally drafting the document. When would you need it? Take your time, she advised. Your graduation is still several months away. Use this period to research thoroughly, to consider all aspects of what such a year might include. The more detailed your vision, the more meaningful the experience will be. As May unfolded into its final weeks, I divided my time between completing semester projects, working my part-time jobs, and researching possibilities for my gap year. What had started as a vague concept gradually took shape as a concrete plan with three main components: skills acquisition through targeted workshops and short courses, practical experience through project-based internships, and cultural immersion through international placements. The more I researched, the more excited I became about the possibilities. A coding boot camp in Berlin, a sustainability project in Costa Rica, a finance internship in Singapore. Each opportunity I discovered seemed to open doors to others, creating a network of potential experiences that could inform my eventual career choices in ways my current limited perspective couldn't anticipate. Zach, upon hearing my evolving plans, was immediately supportive. "This is perfect for you," he declared as we walked across campus after our final advanced data structures class. "You've always approached everything so linearly. This gives you a chance to think laterally, to see connections between fields you might never have considered." "You don't think it's irresponsible?" I asked, still occasionally plagued by the voice of my former self, the one who valued predictability above all else. "Taking a year off when most people will be starting their careers or graduate programs?" He stopped walking to look at me directly. "Emma, you're literally structuring and funding this entire experience yourself. You've created a carefully researched plan with clear educational objectives. There's nothing off about that. It's just a different kind of on." His perspective helped quiet the lingering doubts. Gradually, I began to see the gap year not as a departure from my responsible nature, but as an expression of it, taking responsibility for my development in a broader, more holistic way than simply following the expected path. As final exams approached, bringing the semester to a close, I received an unexpected text from my father. "Your mother and I would like to take you to dinner this weekend to discuss something important. Are you available Saturday evening?" The message triggered a momentary anxiety. The last important discussion with my parents had revealed the theft of my college fund. But things had changed since then. The regular payments had continued without issue, and our limited interactions had been notably more respectful. Still, caution seemed prudent. "What would we be discussing?" I texted back. His response came quickly. "Nothing concerning, I promise. Some positive news we'd like to share in person. Sophia will be there too." The inclusion of Sophia was reassuring. "Saturday works. What time? 7 p.m. at Riverside Bistro? I'll be there." As I put my phone away, I found myself curious rather than apprehensive. Whatever my parents wanted to discuss, I would approach it from a position of strength. No longer the accommodating daughter desperate for approval, but a young woman who had proven she could hold her own even against those who should have been her strongest advocates. The new Emma was ready for whatever came next. Riverside Bistro was busier than usual for a Saturday evening, its warm lighting and exposed brick walls creating an atmosphere of casual elegance. I arrived precisely at 7, mentally prepared for whatever my parents wanted to discuss. The fact that Sophia would be there provided some reassurance, but I still felt a flutter of apprehension as I spotted the three of them already seated at a corner table. My mother waved as I approached, her smile tentative but genuine. My father stood to greet me with an awkward half-hug that I returned briefly before taking my seat beside Sophia, who squeezed my hand under the table, our private signal of solidarity. "You look well, Emma," my mother said, her eyes taking in my simple blouse and dark jeans. "Finals week treating you okay?" "So far, so good," I replied, accepting the menu the server handed me. 2 down, 3 to go. After we ordered, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. My father cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with my mother before speaking. "We wanted to share some news with you both," he began, including Sophia, in his gaze. Your mother and I have made some significant decisions over the past few weeks. I tensed slightly, but kept my expression neutral. What kind of decisions? My mother jumped in, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her water glass. We've decided to sell the house. Of all the announcements I might have expected, this wasn't on the list. The 2-story home in Oak Hills had been our family residence for over 15 years. Sell the house? Sophia echoed my thoughts. Why? My father straightened his shoulders, a gesture I recognized as his preparation for difficult conversations. Several reasons. It's more space than we need now that you're both grown. The market is good. And most importantly, he met my eyes. Directly, we want to make things right. Make things right how? I asked carefully. The house has appreciated significantly since we bought it, he explained. By downsizing to something more modest, we can free up equity. Some of that will go toward paying back your college fund immediately, rather than in installments. The rest will be divided equally between you and Sophia for your futures. I sat back, genuinely surprised. Selling the house was a drastic step. One, that would visibly signal to their friends and colleagues that their financial circumstances had changed. For my image-conscious parents, it represented a significant concession. This isn't necessary, I said slowly. The payment plan is working. Fine. It's not just about the payments, my mother interjected. It's about demonstrating, through actions, that we're committed to making amends and treating both our daughters equally going forward. Sophia leaned forward. When did you decide this? We've been discussing it since the night of our confrontation, my father admitted, the word clearly difficult for him. But the final decision came last week after speaking with a financial advisor. We've already found a smaller townhouse in Riverside Heights, my mother added. It's lovely, still in a nice area, but much more practical for just the two of us. I studied their faces, looking for signs of reluctance or resentment. Instead, I saw something unexpected: relief. As if the decision, though difficult, had lifted a burden they'd been carrying. This is a big change, I said carefully. Are you sure it's what you want? My father nodded, his expression more serious than I'd seen it in years. What we want is to rebuild our family on a foundation of trust and fairness. The house is just a structure. What matters is what we're building between us. The sentiment was so unlike his usual pragmatic focus that I found myself momentarily speechless. Sophia stepped into the silence. I think it's a good decision, she said, practical and meaningful at the same time. My mother reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of touching mine, respecting the boundaries I'd established. We understand if you're skeptical, Emma. We've given you plenty of reason to be, but we're hoping you'll give us a chance to prove, through actions, that we're committed to change. I considered their proposal carefully. The immediate repayment of my college fund would certainly simplify my financial planning, removing the uncertainty of depending on monthly payments, but more significant was the symbolic aspect. My parents voluntarily relinquishing the home that had represented their social standing for so many years. When would this happen? I asked. We've already accepted an offer, my father replied. Closing is in 6 weeks. We'd transfer your funds immediately after. Our meals arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As we began eating, I processed this unexpected development. My parents' decision represented more than financial restitution. It signaled a genuine rethinking of priorities. There's something else we wanted to discuss, my mother said after we'd eaten in silence for a few minutes. About Sophia's wedding. Sophia and I exchanged glances. What about it? She asked cautiously. We've been thinking about what you said, about wanting something simpler, more meaningful, my mother continued. And we want to support that vision, not push our own. My father nodded in agreement. We've spoken with the Brooks. They're actually relieved about scaling back. Apparently, Tyler has been saying for months that he'd prefer something less elaborate. "So you're okay with the garden wedding?" Sophia asked, surprise evident in her voice. "More than okay," my mother assured her. "We've been so caught up in appearances that we lost sight of what really matters, that this day should reflect who you and Tyler are, not who we want people to think we are." The admission was striking in its self-awareness. I studied my parents with new eyes, wondering if the crisis I'd precipitated by confronting them about my college fund had triggered a more profound reevaluation than I'd realized. "Thank you," Sophia said simply, reaching for our mother's hand. "That means a lot." The remainder of dinner unfolded with an ease I hadn't experienced in family gatherings for years. We discussed Sophia's revised wedding plans, my upcoming finals, and the townhouse my parents had purchased. Not once did my father check his phone or dismiss a topic as unimportant, small changes that nevertheless signified a significant shift in his engagement. As we waited for dessert, my mother turned to me with a tentative smile. "Your grandmother mentioned you might be considering a gap year after graduation. That sounds like an exciting opportunity." The fact that she characterized it as exciting rather than impractical or risky caught my attention. "I'm still working out the details," I replied cautiously. "But yes, I'm leaning toward taking a structured year for exploration before committing to graduate school or a specific career path." To my surprise, my father nodded approvingly. "That's a smart approach. I rushed straight from undergrad to my first corporate position without ever considering alternatives. Always wondered what opportunities I might have missed." His support was so unexpected that I momentarily lost my train of thought. "You think it's a good idea?" "I think it's a thoughtful investment in your future," he replied. "Taking time to explore options before committing to a path shows maturity, not indecision." Coming from him, the man who had always emphasized direct routes to financial success, this perspective represented a remarkable shift. I found myself smiling genuinely for the first time that evening. That's exactly how I see it. As we finished our desserts and prepared to leave, my mother touched my arm lightly. "Emma, we know that rebuilding trust will take time. We're not expecting immediate forgiveness or for things to go back to the way they were." She glanced at my father, who nodded encouragingly. "We're hoping for something better than what was before. A relationship based on mutual respect." Her words echoed my own thoughts so closely that I wondered if Grandma Eleanor had been coaching them. "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. "And I'm willing to see where this goes." Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to go our separate ways, my father hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, Emma. Not just for taking your money, but for years of not seeing your value beyond your practicality. You deserved better." The apology, delivered without qualifiers or expectations, touched something deep within me. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." Sophia and I walked to our cars together, both processing the unexpected turn the evening had taken. "Well, that was not what I expected," she said as we reached the parking lot. "Me neither," I admitted. "Do you think they mean it? About changing, I mean." She considered the question thoughtfully. "I think they're trying, really trying. Whether they can maintain it long term," she shrugged. "Time will tell." "Time will tell," I agreed, unlocking my car. But it's a start. The remaining weeks of the semester passed in a blur of final exams, work shifts, and graduation preparations. Throughout it all, the evolving plan for my gap year provided a focal point beyond the immediate academic pressure, a horizon to look toward, filled with possibilities I was only beginning to explore. My detailed proposal for accessing the trust funds took shape gradually, informed by extensive research and countless conversations with Grandma Eleanor, Zach, and even Sophia, whose creative suggestions often pushed me to consider options I might otherwise have overlooked. The final document outlined a structured year divided into 4 segments: 3 months devoted to technical skill enhancement through intensive workshops and certification programs, 3 months of project-based work with startups in emerging fields, 3 months of international exposure through carefully selected internships, and 3 months of integration and planning for the next step, whether that be graduate school or a career path aligned with my newly clarified interests. When I presented the completed proposal to Grandma Eleanor over dinner at her house, her approval was immediate and wholehearted. "This is precisely the kind of thoughtful approach your grandfather had in mind when he established the early access provision," she said, reviewing the detailed budget and timeline I'd prepared. "Not just a plan for spending money, but a strategy for investment in yourself." "So you'll approve the disbursement?" I asked, though her response was already clear. "Without hesitation," she confirmed. "I'll have the paperwork ready next week." True to their word, my parents closed on their house sale in early June, downsizing to the townhouse they'd purchased in Riverside Heights. The day after closing, my father transferred the remaining balance of my college fund in full, a financial resolution that, while significant, felt almost secondary to the more meaningful changes in our family dynamics. Sophia's wedding, held in Grandma Eleanor's garden on a perfect June afternoon, reflected the transformation we'd all undergone. Simple yet elegant, intimate yet joyful, it celebrated not just her union with Tyler, but also a new understanding of what truly constituted value and meaning in our lives. Standing beside her as maid of honor, watching my parents beam with genuine pride unmarred by concern for appearances, I felt a sense of alignment I'd never experienced in family gatherings before, as if we were all finally seeing and appreciating each other as we truly were, not as the roles we'd been assigned. At the reception, my father approached me as I stood watching couples dance on the small patio. "Your grandmother tells me you've finalized your plans for next year," he said, his tone conversational rather than judgmental. I nodded. The trust. Disbursement was approved last week. I leave for Berlin in September for the first phase. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. Not just for creating such a thoughtful plan, but for having the courage to forge your own path. That takes real strength of character. The words, spoken without qualification or comparison to Sophia, warmed something in me that had been cold for a very long time. "Thank you, Dad." As summer unfolded, I divided my time between preparations for my gap year and a new part-time position at a local tech firm, a deliberate choice that provided both income and experience without consuming all my energy. For perhaps the first time, I was consciously creating space for other dimensions of my life: friendships, family relationships, and the simple pleasure of anticipating the adventures ahead. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve, with weekly family dinners that gradually became less awkward and more genuine. The changes in them seemed to be holding, small but significant shifts in how they listened, what they valued, how they balanced their relationship with both daughters. Sophia and Tyler, settling into married life in a modest apartment near his architectural firm, established their own traditions independent of parental expectations. Their decision to delay starting a family until they were financially secure, on their own terms, reflected a new alignment of priorities that would have been unthinkable months earlier. As August drew to a close and my departure for Berlin approached, Grandma Eleanor hosted a small gathering at her house, a send-off celebration with just my closest circle: Sophia and Tyler, Zach, my parents, and Uncle James. After dinner, we enjoyed dessert on her back porch, Grandma Eleanor raised her glass. "To Emma," she said, her eyes bright with emotion, "who turned a crisis into a catalyst and reminded all of us what courage looks like." The toast brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition of how far I'd come. From that moment in the financial aid office when I'd first learned my college fund was gone, what had begun as financial betrayal had transformed into a profound recalibration of my understanding of family, value, and my own capacity for self-advocacy. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, I found myself alone with Zach in Grandma Eleanor's garden, the summer night warm around us. "Nervous about Berlin?" he asked, nudging my shoulder lightly. "A little," I admitted. "But it's a good kind of nervous. Excited nervous." "You're going to be amazing," he said with absolute conviction. "The Emma Wilson Global Adventure Tour is going to change your life." I laughed at his characterization, but recognized the truth in it. It already has, in a way. Just making the decision to do something so unlike my usual cautious approach, that's changed me already. He nodded, understanding as always. "The best part is watching you realize how strong you've always been. The rest of us have seen it for years." As we sat in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, not just the external events of confrontation and resolution, but the internal transformation they had catalyzed. I had discovered a capacity for courage I hadn't known I possessed, a willingness to stand up for myself that had altered my relationship with my entire family. The stolen college fund that had seemed like a devastating setback had ultimately become the catalyst for profound growth, not just for me, but for everyone involved. My parents were learning to value substance over appearance, to respect boundaries, to demonstrate love through actions rather than words. Sophia was discovering her own voice, independent of the golden child role she'd inhabited for so long. And I was stepping into a future not constrained by other people's expectations or by my own cautious limitations. The money had been returned, but what I had gained went far beyond financial restitution. I had reclaimed not just my college fund, but my sense of agency, my voice, my right to shape my own future on my own terms. As Zach and I walked back toward the house, the lights warm against the gathering darkness, I felt a profound sense of peace, not the passive acceptance I had, once mistaken for maturity, but the genuine equilibrium that comes from standing firmly in your own truth. The path ahead might not be as clearly defined as my former plans, but it was undeniably mine, chosen with intention, pursued with courage, and supported by a family that was learning, however imperfectly, what it meant to truly see and value each other. That, I realized, was the most unexpected outcome of this entire journey. What had begun with betrayal had culminated in a kind of healing I hadn't known was possible. Not a perfect resolution that erased all past hurts, but a new beginning built on more solid ground. My college fund had been stolen, then restored. But what I had gained in the process was something far more valuable. The knowledge that I had the strength to face whatever challenges came next, and the wisdom to recognize that true security came not from money or plans or others' approval, but from the unshakable foundation I had built within myself. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new opportunities for growth, and I was ready for all of it, no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had claimed for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.